So one project I've been very anxious to work on is getting the dinghy crane installed on the boat.
Welcome to another episode of our Great Loop project boat that we bought in Florida and cruised home to Tennessee. On this series of videos we do lots of DIY projects and we take small adventures on the Tennessee River.
Now there is several things we got to do before we can just install this crane. One is something I already started. I didn't get in it on camera, but we had to cut this plate off. Now this plate was oriented for the front of the other boat and it was kind of at an angle, so we had to cut it off, which I already did. Just to free it, we're gonna cut a hole, slide it down into the deck, mark it where it needs to be oriented so it can be re-welded. And after it's all re-welded, we got to take all this, sand it down, and repaint it and make it nice and shiny again. So let's get this thing over to the boat and let's start fitting it.
The first thing I had to do is just bite the bullet and start drilling holes in the boat. I used the plate I cut off the pole for a template to know exactly where I needed to put the hole.
It's a good one. Man, this boat is solid. Being a 1987 model boat, look how fresh that coring is. Oh my god, that is like amazing, especially on an outside piece of fiberglass.
Getting the pole perfectly lined up was a challenge. You want to try to get it level, but you know the boat isn't sitting perfectly level in the water either. So a level is kind of out of the question. The best thing we could do is just take measurements off of everything to see if it's square.
Alright, I know that's a little bit off. I do have it. So now let me set the...
Now what I gotta do is mark the plate exactly where it needs to go on the pole. So when we go to weld it, it's put back on exactly right. I also needed to check the length of the pole by setting the base of the crane on. I apparently got extremely lucky because the pole length is exactly perfect.
You could ask for this to fit any better. Holy crap.
There was no need to shorten it or even lengthen it. Now it is time to install the pole base plate. That way the pole is the exact height it needs to be so I can mark the top plate just perfect. After everything was marked up correctly, I took this pole down to my boys down at Garage Bound to get this thing welded back together.
Alright, so after we got the pole welded for the crane, I went ahead and sanded it down and primed it. I'm going to try to get this part of it painted first and try to get it installed on the boat, just so it's out of the way. Still got quite a bit to do on like sanding down the crane body itself and all that good stuff, so I'm just going to do it piece by piece. So I am going to wire this thing through the pole. I got the pole base right here, and then what I'm going to do is drill a hole in it and run some of this marine grade 120 volt Romex. I'm going to have to drill a hole, run it all the way through the ceiling of the aft cabin, but I'm also going to put it straight up through the pole to the top. Perfect. Alright, so I'm down here in the aft cabin, and I got this through the floor. And what we're going to do is we're going to run this wire all the way, probably zip tie it to this tube here. We'll run it all the way to here, run it right up in here where there's already a hole for another tube. Run it through there and then run it into the cabinet that's on the deck. So I kind of got it poked through that hole. And now we just gotta run up top and pull it too.
I'm gonna run this wire right up through here, right to this outlet.
I'm gonna run that wire all the way to that outlet back here. And that outlet has a dedicated breaker, and it's for an ice maker. Now, we don't plan on reinstalling an ice maker on this thing, so I'm gonna relabel that for the Davit crane. That way the crane will be on its dedicated breaker. All right, so the one thing I want to do, I want to try to Dremel out this hole just a little bit. It is a very, very tight fit. I don't want to scratch up the new pole. We just freshly repainted it. All right, so what we got going on up there is the plate. I think when it got welded, it might have warped it a little bit. So it was sticking up about yay much on one side. And I thought when I pulled the screws down to it, or tighten the screws down, maybe it would pull the plate to it. It seemed like it did when I was test fitting it. Of course, I had to pull the screws back out to get the 5200 underneath it and then put it back down, and when I went to go put the screws back, they just stripped. But I think it was only going in the balsa coring, so it looks like there's two layers on that. There's a balsa coring and then a marine grade plywood in the upper deck. So I think it's probably not the best that I used the screws that I used just going into the balsa coring. That's not a good way to hold that. Unfortunately, I'm probably just going to do what I was hoping not to do, which is drill holes all the way through it and just put nuts and washers on the back side. The reason why I didn't want to do that is just for aesthetics. I didn't want a bunch of nuts on the bottom side of that, but mechanically I think it might be the best to do that. That way it's like 100%, no questions asked, secured, and you can also keep an eye on it and see if any of them are coming loose. So I did have two laying around, and I use those to clamp it down and hold while the 5200 is drying. And maybe tomorrow or sometime I'm just gonna go buy a whole bunch of bolts and nuts and washers that all match and look decent, and just put them around that. And I guess that's just what we're gonna do, and it would probably be the best thing to do anyway. So we almost have the dinghy crane boat part installed. Now we just gotta paint the rest of it and bring it down here and just set it on that pole, and then maybe that project will be done. So one of the things that is an issue is there's no hole in this part right here for me to run the wire. I bought a really long chopper bit. So I know this thing is made for wood, but I'm hoping aluminum is a lot softer metal than what this is, and it'll actually at least just work one time. So let's give this a try.
The problem here is the hole is super deep, so getting anything in there to drill a sufficient hole is an absolute challenge.
I did not think it would be that difficult to drill a hole in something, but I used a 1/4 inch extension with a socket to fit the hole saw bit, and I used my 1/4 inch impact, and then I stuffed a blanket in the hole because it was sitting there like wobbling really bad, so I kind of used it, wrapped it around there to kind of hold it tight and still. But once I started without the bit on it, just to drill a simple hole. That took forever, and then once I put the hole saw on it, it kind of went right through. But it's done. I think I got just about all the holes I need drilled in this thing. I have one more to do.
Alright, so here we go with a massive amount of body work. It is very slow and painful. I'll rush through it as quick as I can so I don't bore you to death. I want you to take note that the boom extension and the crane base was not prepped in this session. The only reason why they're in the paint booth right now is to hold the crane body. I'll save you the pain from the prep work for the boom and the base and just get straight to the painting. Before we reassemble the crane, we decided to come back down to the boat and install some more hardware on the pole. Now if you remember, I told you I wanted to put bolts all the way through the hardtop. But before we do that, I decided to buff the area and make it nice and shiny before we drill holes and stick bolts in it.
Okay.
And right here is where it took a turn for the worst.
Oh no!
What?
You cracked it.
Where did I crack?
The fiberglass.
Oh shit. Bad?
Yes.
Well, we cracked the hardtop. I think that's like an area where there's nothing behind it at all. And just tightening down, it split it. So I think how I'm gonna correct this is I'm gonna see if I could get a plate made. Just cut it in half and stick it up there and use it as like a giant washer. But for now, I think I'm just gonna finish installing the screws.
Well, the crane is now installed on the boat. I unfortunately have not had the time yet to find out if it will lift my 11-foot careen. That will definitely have to be a future episode. On the very next episode, you will find out what went wrong with the transmission.